Greetings and welcome to chapter. Okay. Welcome to chapter 3, section 2. We're going to go through this. Essentially, we're going to be dealing with what we might call, they talk about a bunch of the stuff, but the key idea here is we want to talk about what's called a truth function in logic. Okay, a truth function. And a truth function is essentially the idea that the truth value of a statement is determined by the truth value of its parts. Okay? Meaning that essentially that if you put a couple statements together like an and statement and you have something like, let's make that a little bit bigger, read it. If you have something like Bill Clinton is currently president and Joseph Biden is currently vice president, that whether or not this is a true statement depends upon whether or not Joseph Biden is currently vice president, and Bill Clinton is currently president. And this, in this case, would be false. Why? Because this first part about Bill Clinton is false. But the second part may be true, but it's only because the first part is false that it doesn't make the whole thing true. And so the truth function is just saying, if this part is false and this part is true, we must conclude that the statement as a whole, however, is false. Because you can't say something and something are true when one of them is false. It will be a false statement. And so truth function just means if you know what the truth value of the parts is, you can figure out what the truth value of the whole thing is. And so what we do is we begin to find, truth value is just, is it true or false? And we begin to sort of start with, creating what we call truth tables. A truth table is a diagram. This is on page 220 of the most recent book. It's a diagram that gives all the possible truth values for a simple or compound statement. A simple statement has two possible truth values. It can be true or it can be false. A compound statement, though, will be determined via the truth function, via the truth of those parts. And so we can come down here and we can begin to sort of look at these, and we can sort of, on page 221 at the bottom, you have the tilde. P, a letter, a capital letter, a simple statement, if it's true, then whenever it is not P, then it will be false. So if the truth value of something like the door is closed, whatever room you're in, the door is closed, if that's true, then if somebody says the door is not closed, you say that's not true, that's false. And so anytime P is true, not P will be false. And anytime P is false, so suppose the door is open, and you say the door is closed, and then somebody says the door is not closed, that's true, but the statement the door is not closed, or the door is closed, is false. So anytime one is true, the negation of it will be false, and whenever it's false, the negation of it will be true. A simple rule. Now then, conjunctive statements, those are the ones with dot, translated as and we call the parts of it the conjuncts, meaning that if you have the letter P and you have the letter Q, and let's suppose P is true and Q is true, then we would know P and Q will be true. So if you had something like Obama is currently president and Joe Biden is currently vice president, both those are true, so as a statement can join together, it's true. But if you had something like Obama is currently president, but the second part was false, Al Gore is currently vice president, then we would have a false statement. Obama is president and Al Gore is currently vice president. That is a false statement because one of the conjuncts is false. It doesn't matter which one, if it's P or if it's Q. And if they're both false, then the statement has to be false. It can only be true if both conjuncts are true. Simple enough. Now, from there we have disjunctive statements, ones with wedge. We call each of the letters, the P and the Q, we call those our disjuncts. P or Q, the P is a disjunct, Q is a disjunct. And essentially, wedge or statements are a little bit more forgiving. In conjunctive statements, and it's only true if both are true. In or statements, if one of them is true, the whole thing is true. They can both be true. If they're both true, if Obama is president or Joe Biden is president or is vice president, that's fine. But if it's Bill Clinton is president or Joseph Biden is vice president, well, that or statement has said, hey, they don't have to both be true, only one has to be true. The nice thing about or statements is you could say something if it's true, like, you've maybe done this as a kid or other things, like, I was here on time, or I can eat ice cream for dessert. And, it's a true statement. Or I can eat ice cream for dinner. Ice cream for dessert, that's not really that special. I can eat ice cream for dinner. I was here on time, or I can eat ice cream for dinner. I was here on time, that's true, and so the statement as a whole is true. It doesn't matter whether or not I can eat ice cream for dinner or not. The statement is true because of the or. It doesn't say both have to be true, it just says that one of them is true. And so then the only way that a wedge statement will be false is if one is false, is if both are false. If we're saying like Bill Clinton is currently president, or Al Gore is currently vice president. They're both false, and so even though you're putting together two false statements, both the disjuncts are false, so it has to be false. Horseshoe. Now then, in this case, we have the antecedent as P and the consequent as Q, and if it's true, like if you can think about the truth value of this. If you know the antecedent is true, you know the consequent is true, then there's no reason not to believe that the conditional statement is true. It's a true statement together. Okay. Now it doesn't mean it will be the case, but we'll just go ahead and assume it's true. So if it's something like, if Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and Abraham Lincoln is dead, it's true that he was assassinated. It's true that he's dead. So we'd say that that's a true statement. However, if it was something like, if George Washington was assassinated, I'm sorry, that wasn't making sense. If I'm trying to think of something that's true and something that's false. If wine is alcoholic, then kids can drink it. And that's the case. Then kids are allowed to drink it. In this case, if wine is alcoholic is true, kids are allowed to drink alcohol is false. And so anytime the antecedent is true, the consequent must be true. And so if the antecedent is true but the consequent is false, then we know the conditional relationship doesn't work. Any others, it could be working, but we know in that case that if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, it doesn't make sense, because anytime the antecedent is true, the consequent must be true. So if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, we must conclude it's false. But if the antecedent is false, like if George Washington commits suicide, then George Washington will be dead. George Washington's dead, but he didn't commit suicide, then we still doesn't mean the statement is false, because it is true that if he had committed suicide, he would be dead. The same thing's true. If Obama committed suicide, then Obama would be dead. Both of those are false, but it's still a true conditional statement. The only way we know it's false, and so every other case we're just going to label it true, is if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. Now, finally, triple bar. In this case, triple bar is like an antecedent and a consequent at the same time. And Q is both an antecedent and a consequent. And we know that whenever the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, that we have a false statement, because that conditional relationship doesn't work. And so in this case, if they're both true, we say P triple bar Q will be true. And if they're both false, it could be a true statement. Bill Clinton will be president if and only if he is elected or something. But that doesn't make any sense, because that wouldn't show the conditional relationship. You will get to go out if and only if your room is clean. If your room is clean, then you can go out, and if you're going out, then you must have cleaned your room. In that case, even if both of those are false, that conditional relationship may still exist. And so we know it's false only if one of them is true and the other one's false. Otherwise, we label if they're both true or they're both false, we go ahead and label it true. Now, at this point, I want to make a comment. Okay? One of the most easy things to do is you can try to understand these, and you should try to memorize them. Realize that when you do this, usually it doesn't really work in an online class for me to give you a quiz, but that would be the first thing I would do. Is tomorrow morning, if we were in class, I would say, I want you to be able to recreate these charts for me. So what you should do is study this, write out all these charts, and then recreate them and see if you can do it without from memory. Because it's going to go a lot easier if you don't have to constantly look back. But it should all be fairly simple. Basically, if you turn to page 221 in your textbook, there's this chart 3.21, and it says tilde when it negates a false, true when it negates a false statement. It's going to be true if the statement's false. Dot will be true only if both conjuncts are true. Wedge will be true when at least one of the disjuncts is true. Horseshoe is always true unless the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. And triple bar is true whenever the truth values of both parts are the same. And this is a good chart to sort of keep in mind, and it kind of sets the basic rules for how that truth function works. Okay, now, the last thing we might want to do before we move along is, well, I'm trying to think if I want to, I'll go ahead and do this because it will basically be showing how we can apply this to longer statements and find the truth value when we know the truth value of the parts. Okay? So we'll do that in the next video.